Back in 2022, the Oscars decided to have a bunch of people tell jokes about animation, likening it to just stuff kids enjoyed and adults endured.
Because animated films make up some of our most formative movie experiences as kids.
So many kids watch these movies over and over
And over and over and over and over and over.
I see some parents out there know exactly what we're talking about.
Watching stupid kid shows? Oh, God.
Ouch.
Oh, God.
Pipes and pipes are
The Academy has never been kind to animation in general in its nearly century of existence. And in fact, the only animated film ever nominated for Best Picture was Beauty and the Beast in 1992.
And last but not least, a beauty and a beast.
Now, let's be honest, most of us could care less what the Academy thinks about movies in general, as there's often too much politics or too much of an agenda when it comes to some of these awards, with not a lot of variety and diversity in who wins. But I think this shows something in the general industry at large, this stereotypical belief that animation is an inferior form of cinema and storytelling. And this is mostly because we have been conditioned by the industry to believe that animation is just for kids. With all that being said, why do animations deserve to be respected, awarded, and not relegated to the kids section of the Oscars? Well, let's dive into that and how Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse helps to prove that animation really does belong. Before I went to see Across the Spider-Verse in theaters on opening night, I saw this tweet from one of the animators of the movie who was proud of all the hard work he and all of the other artists put in for this movie. And it's a good reminder that there are a ton of talented artists that make these movies possible that often do not receive the recognition they deserve. And that's true in both live action and in animation. But I believe that idea is starting to change, as this movie in particular grossed nearly $209 million on opening weekend and received yet again high ratings both from critics and the audience scores, just like the first movie did. And while you're probably thinking, well, Rotten Tomatoes score and money alone doesn't make something a high form of cinema, and yes, you'd be right, but we wanted to demonstrate that animated movies that make it to theaters can actually be profitable before we talk about any of the real reasons why animation might be even a superior form of cinema. So let's get started with the story. Animations have an interesting job to do when it comes to telling a story, as they do not have the same luxury as a live action movie does with being able to just go out and do a quick reshoot. They really have to have their story locked down for the main process of animating it, or they waste a lot of time and resources. Their storyboarding process is quite different than live action. Live action movies rarely have the luxury of a complete script. This is not to say that there are never full scripts written for live action films before they start filming, but with ever increasing special effects in movies, CGI, VFX, you kind of get the picture here. There are a lot of moving pieces that need to be set up before a script is even finalized, with many industry insiders even joking about how scripts are being written while production and filming is happening. And I don't think we have to look much farther than the Star Wars sequel trilogy to see what happens often in those situations.
Look what you have made.
With J.J. Abrams saying, you just never really know. But having a plan, I learned, in some cases the hard way, is the most critical thing, because otherwise you don't know what you're setting up, you don't know what to emphasize, because if you don't know the inevitable of the story, you're just as good as your last sequence, or effect, or joke, or whatever, but you want to be leading to something inevitable. And this is where animation actually shines in its storytelling. It's costly to produce an animated film, as you are essentially creating a world from scratch. To counteract this issue, the story for an animated film is often thought out way ahead of time and crafted over and over again until it's pretty solid. A lot of attention goes into the story, as it can be hard to change during an animated film's production. In fact, many animated films hire writers who can also illustrate and storyboard the scenes so they can get a sense of how it will play out as they are writing the script. This stands in contrast to live action, where many times they will storyboard after a script is written. Essentially, for animated films, the story has been carefully thought out, redrafted several times, had countless checks on the plot and how certain scenes would look and work out through storyboarding. This results in a very crisp and well-told story that seems to, even if it's not maybe a great story, it's at least been well thought out. Similar processes were used to craft the story for Across the Spiderverse by Chris Miller and Phil Lord, who both have a lot of experience in writing for animated films. And I think you see the power of a well-crafted story for this movie that's a sequel. Often the movies that have the shakiest stories in any franchise are known for not being treated as well as the first. In this case, one could argue that this movie exceeds that of the first movie in both storytelling and in artistic direction. And artistic direction is our next big reason why animation is a high art form of cinema. In live action films, one is often limited to what can physically happen outside of VFX or CGI, of course. And don't worry, we're going to talk about VFX and CGI here in just a second. But animations offer so much flexibility in location, character design, action scenes, and more that almost anything storytelling-wise is possible. Where in live action, oftentimes you're limited by a budget, how many times you can, blow up a car or massive set pieces. Unless, of course, you're Christopher Nolan, I guess. The point is here, animators have so much more creative control and room for exaggeration in their films than live action does. I don't think I have to convince you that Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse might be one of the most visually compelling superhero movies and settings of all time. And it's a fair question to ask if you could even pull off something similar in feel and scale and artistic direction in a live action movie. And I think you saw enough of what that potentially could look like in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. Meh. In fact, Across the Spiderverse utilized at least 6 different animation styles that helped to set all of the universes apart and made each version of the Spider-Man's universe visually compelling and honestly well thought out, allowing each character to have their own incredibly unique feeling, even as they changed throughout each universe they visited. And then you had the creative animated background elements that would change based on the character's emotion in that given moment. It's beautiful and a breath of fresh air compared to Marvel's typical white balance to perfection look across all of its movies. But any of us who watch animation in any form know that there is a lot of artistry and beauty in animated works, from The Prince of Egypt, Song of the Sea, Spirited Away, Legend of the Guardians, Arcane, Treasure Planet, Cowboy Bebop, Violet Evergarden, and so many more. We could sit here all day and find countless examples of animations that have more than just an in-depth story, but a depth to the art of it as well. This allows you to get wrapped up into the world building and setting more so than a lot of movies that involve a certain ant. Yeah, what a boring, lifeless world. Imagine if this movie was animated. Or wait, at what point are live action movies just trying to be animated movies? Well, this question brings us to our final point about why animation should be considered a high form of cinema. At this point in time, how much of a movie that we watch nowadays is actually made up of live action elements and not just CGI? I mean, just check out this Little Mermaid behind the scenes clip of everyone on a blue screen. Has modern filmmaking come to the point where it can really survive without a lot of souped up animation tricks? I mean, when it boils down to it, a lot of VFX or CGI work really is just an incredibly advanced form of animation that even requires either programs built to animate all of the assets, or that's done by hand, of course. In a sense, live action in today's movie industry needs all of the visual effects to work. Even on movies, you wouldn't expect that to be the case. Where the other way around, animation has never really needed live action assets to make its movie. I mean, maybe for reference, but beyond that, it kind of holds its own. And I'm not criticizing live action films for having to do this. I really like live action films still, but more just making the point that maybe animation shouldn't be relegated to the kids' table, considering how much animation is used in almost every movie nowadays. Well, tell us what you think below, and be sure to check out this animated, deepfake video on Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny.